Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, July 30th, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Jacksonville, Florida. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Graduate Certificate Program in Penetration Testing and Ethical Hacking. Well, and today was again Apple's surprise update everything day. Apple doesn't have a schedule for this. Last time we had an event like this was, I believe, back in May. It was somewhat predictable based on sort of history and, of course, some of the beta releases and RC releases that came out sort of a week and two ago. And that usually is a good indication that we soon have one of these updates coming from Apple. They updated essentially all of the operating system, iOS, iPadOS, macOS, watchOS, tvOS, visionOS. Don't think they missed one here. A lot of the updates are in common across different operating systems. That's because they all pretty much run the same kernel. Also, Safari, meaning WebKit vulnerabilities, usually transfer over. I think watchOS does not have WebKit, so some of these vulnerabilities do not apply to the Apple Watch. Overall, 89 different vulnerabilities that were patched. Initially, I had 29 here. That's, just before recording this, I should double check because that number looked a little bit small. It was just a typo I had here in the early version of that diary and hasn't updated quite yet as I'm recording this, but should update shortly. So 89 is the magic number here as far as the number of updates go. Now, severity of the updates, obviously a little bit crapshoot here when it comes to Apple. Apple's vulnerability descriptions are fairly terse, usually just one sentence, but they do sometimes say that, hey, that this particular vulnerability may elevate privileges or it crashes Safari, like in the case of one vulnerability here. So some of them are obvious sandbox escape, privilege escalation, denial of service vulnerabilities. Where it gets a little bit more tricky are vulnerabilities that basically sort of cause memory corruption. In particular, when they're affecting WebKit, this could be a supercritical vulnerability in the sense that it could lead to a remote code execution as someone visits a malicious web page, so without any additional user interaction. However, it's not really clear what you can do with this memory corruption. That really depends on a lot of other factors that aren't really disclosed here by Apple. None of these vulnerabilities are explicitly labeled as exploited. So the assumption is they at least haven't been exploited at this point as far as Apple is aware. Patch, I wouldn't really rush this out necessarily, but something you probably want to get done over the next week. For personal devices, just apply the patch overnight and you should be all set and all good to go. At this point, I patched some of my devices, haven't had any issues at this point, but of course, that's a fairly small sample here. And then we also had a diary by Xavier. Xavier wrote, a topic I always like, and that's how to do things with scripts faster, simpler. In this case, it's a simple triage problem. You got a bunch of files. Some of these files are zip files, and then you need to check if a certain pattern is inside those files, in particular the zip files. So what Xavier did here is write a little Python script that first of all checks if a file is a zip file based on the first 4 bytes in the file. That has, of course, that typical PK and then the version number, signature, and then if it's one of those files, it will then decompress the file and then check if the decompressed version does have the particular signature in it. And then, of course, it will copy all the matching files into a special directory for further analysis. Real quick triage script. And like I said, I love these. Would actually be nice to benchmark some of the different options here. Like, if you do it sort of with cgrep as a bash script, if you do it with good old Perl, which was sort of written to do stuff like this. And then, well, maybe someone can come up with a C solution or something else to sort of see how it performs. This, of course, is also very quick to write, which, well, is the real beauty of some of these solutions. And yesterday I mentioned that a Cisco ISE vulnerability had already been exploited and was added to the known exploited vulnerability database by CISA. There was another product here, a PaperCut, that was also mentioned as being already exploited. I didn't mention it yesterday because it was an older vulnerability, a 2023 vulnerability. But I still decided today to mention it because, first of all, there was a second vulnerability in that same release, a path traversal vulnerability that was exploited pretty soon after this vulnerability became known. So now we have the second one of these two vulnerabilities that's being exploited. The path traversal vulnerability caused quite a bit of pain with ransomware and such in some cases back in the day, meaning about 2 years ago. Horizon 3 AI did a good write-up on that vulnerability. Haven't seen the same amount of detail yet for the cross-site request forgery vulnerability that was now also added to the known exploited vulnerability database. But if you're running a PaperCut, which is software they're using to manage print servers in large enterprises usually, well, if you're using that software, please make sure it's up to date. Yes, the patch is 2 years old, but this is one of those things, printers, you only worry about them if they don't work, so they're easily overlooked in your normal patching cycle. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.